My name's Nick Payne. So my role is to help make sense of the technology that Google has to offer and help organizations like you drive change within your business, leveraging that technology. There's three themes for today that I want you to consider, and you'll see that coming up in various parts of today's session. The first is simple. As organizations grow and become more geographically dispersed, or just dispersed within, one city potentially, we want tools that are going to make our lives easier. The second is kind of a nice lead-in from that. Smart. We want to work smarter and leveraging things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to change the way that we do business. And the final piece is around security. It's probably, we had GDPR last year. It's one of these areas that are so pressing both in the corporate world but also our personal lives. We want to know that the platform that we are using is secure and that we're not going to have massive data breaches that from a business perspective is going to lead to huge fines. But from a personal perspective, your data are out there in an uncontrolled environment. The first section is really actually looking at the evolution of transformation. Evolution is a fact, and I'm not talking about, I'm going to get into a conversation around Darwinism, but this is around the technological evolution. This idea that change is not linear, it works in waves and cycles. With each of these evolutions, if we want to call it that, is a period of prosperity, but then a period of social unrest. So from the left-hand side, we start to look at print through to the Industrial Revolution, through to electricity, the transportation era. But ultimately will bring us back down to some of the content that we're sort of talking about later on in today's session. And this idea of a collaborative workplace. Ultimately, as organizations have grown, as I've said, we want that experience of being able to go over to Danny and we're working on a project and have a conversation with him about this particular proposal or report that we're working on. As businesses grow, as businesses open in new regions to attract new talent, new technological talent, it becomes very difficult to have that closeness. So having technology that is going to enable us to have that collaborative workplace that is going to help us to change the way that we do business. High performance analytics. Many of you in this room collect huge amounts of data on your customers, on your competitors, on your industry. But the question is then, what are we doing with that? Are we deriving true business insight or true insight from that data? How can we take that data and do something meaningful with it? Once we start to analyze that data, we can then do some pretty impressive things around machine learning and begin to predict patterns. So an example in retail, can we start to understand buying behaviors and use that to predict and make recommendations based on a particular individual's buying behaviors? Predictive maintenance. Logistics firms, transportation organizations with heavy machinery, how can we start to be less reactive and more proactive around how we maintain that machinery? This applies to so many organizations, right? Applies to organizations in the housing sector where they have a responsibility towards the tenants within those properties. A boiler goes down in an elderly person's property. How can we get ahead of that sort of thing and predict when those types of machines need maintenance? And a lot of that is powered by the cloud and ultimately powered by a lot of what's up here and leveraging that data to make those predictions. But ultimately, it's leveraging this kind of technology to, we all know with the Amazon Alexa that you can order via Amazon by talking to this device. Walmart in the US are partnering up with Google so you can order your groceries by just talking to it. How can we then start to leverage that within our own businesses to improve customer experience? Huge amounts of organizations have customer contact centers. How can we leverage this type of chatbot technology or smart assistant technology to take the burden away from those real low value, low ticket items that a bot like this could answer? Health monitoring. Again, we're seeing this emerge and become more and more popular. I mean, Fitbits, I've probably seen a few smartwatches knocking around. I personally don't have one. But we're becoming more and more focused on our health and monitoring our health. And what this could then give rise to is a new way of then predicting things like, all right, using my smartwatch, it knows that I've passed through Birmingham, there's been an outbreak of flu, it knows my history of having pneumonia as a youngster, and it's going to make a recommendation because I've passed through that area that I'm 71% more likely to contract that flu virus. Why don't you take a trip down to your local pharmacy and get a flu jab? That type of thing, that where we can start to build on the data that these devices are collecting, geographic information and information pulled from other sources, to start to make recommendations like that. Self-driving car. Has anyone been in one of these? No? Okay, me neither. But this is the norm in the US, right? In certain states, this is fairly commonplace. And I, for one, am massively excited for when this is the norm. The idea that everyone is going to be moving at the same speed, it should reduce accidents. That idea that you can potentially get in the back and do some work if you so wish. But ultimately, this is all possible through cloud computing. And yes, it's thinking big, but a lot of these organizations are already out there and already pushing the boundaries. There's often an issue with all of this stuff, is people often have a negative perception or a negative view of, okay, well, Tesla are announcing the autonomous trucks, sort of in line with the self-driving car. That is going to cost us X number of million lorry drivers in the US. What they don't then talk about is actually, whilst that may be the case, this gives rise to a massive opportunity. So they're not talking about the 12 million or so jobs that's going to create in building that infrastructure. And not just talking about tech talent, we're talking about people that are actually going to have to widen the roads or change the physical infrastructure within some of these states. So each of these things, whilst there's an element of loss, there's also a massive opportunity that this creates. I like this because I'm a nerd, but there's a massive shift that we're seeing. Computers now, if we look at it today, are 4 billion times more powerful than they were in the 1960s. I mean, we all walk around with a smartphone. I'm envious of those that don't. I'm envious of those that have a flip phone that just does calls and texts. I quite like that idea, to a simpler time. This is quite mundane, right? Because we're talking about a chipset, but ultimately this is computing power that is designed to power and train a machine learning model that can take days, and it reduces that time from 1 day to 30 minutes. So ultimately what we're getting to is how can we work smarter so that we're ultimately focusing on that end goal and driving that business change within our business. This is an example that's peddled out a huge amount, is Blockbuster, Netflix. But Encyclopedia Britannica, right? These are companies that didn't adapt, didn't change. Encyclopedia Britannica was, I mean, I remember as a kid going into friends' houses and you walk in this lavish library or study that they had with these books. You think, oh, that's nice. How often do they use that? Does anyone have these, the full set? Oh, show off. You still got them?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
The boys use them.
Amazing. So they still use them today.
Still like to look them up.
Phenomenal. So this was a $600 million business, $600 million a year business back in 1992. 2012, it ceased to exist. And then came in Carter, right? Microsoft thought they'd ever go at it. But all of these, so this has then essentially been replaced and stripped out by Wikipedia. 1 billion monthly users. Everyone can contribute, edit, and absorb that information. The taxis, I'm not going to labor the point about this, but we can all now, summon a ride. That has fundamentally transformed one of the more traditional sort of transportation methods. And these taxis, black cabs in the UK haven't quite caught up and they haven't adapted. And if you look at the list of disruptors globally, there are more and more ride-sharing companies that are popping up. Lyft, there's a Chinese Chinese ride-sharing company that is now fourth on the disruptor list, but ultimately has completely transformed the way that you summon a ride. This talks to a lot of what we expect as society now, right? It's Simon Sinek talks about it. It's instant gratification. We expect information on demand. We expect the ability to be able to hail a ride and it arrive in 6 minutes. We expect to be able to stream and binge and watch copious amounts of true crime documentaries that me and my wife are obsessed with at the moment. But this obsession with this instant gratification, it's changing our expectations. And this gives rise to disruptors. And companies that, some of which you'll be familiar with. Company that I do want to talk about, Nintendo. They are a company that embrace change. This is the value of embracing change. In the 1800s, they were a card game. And they recognize, so if we think about that earlier set of diagrams, they were very much in that print space. I'm going to bring the image through. That's what it started out like back in the 1800s. And then came the Game Boys and the handheld devices. There were a load of primitive devices in between, but ultimately, you then had the Game Boy and the Nintendo DS. But every single time that Nintendo looked like they were going to taper away, then came another console, GameCube. Then came the Wii. And we've all stood there like idiots in living rooms at Christmas, having games of tennis and bowling and trying not to throw the control at your dear old nana in the corner. And when that started to taper off, you thought, where are Nintendo going to go? And then came Pokemon Go, which was some work that was done with a company called Niantic. It was a Google spin-off, but then it gave rise to zombies that are just walking around catching Pokemon everywhere in London. But then when that started tapering off and people lost interest in this, then came the Nintendo Switch, which again, it was a change. It embraced a completely different way of playing, consuming video games. For those of you that don't know, right, so this is the value of embracing change. Google have just announced Google Stadia, which, and apologies if you're not into gaming, but just go with me on this. You've got friends that are on an Xbox, different platforms. You've got friends that are on a PlayStation. You may have kids that use these different devices. And what Google have said is it doesn't matter what platform you're on. It doesn't matter what control you've got. If you want to play online with your friends on Fortnite or whatever game it may be, here's Google Stadia. And it's basically using a web browser to play and consume video games. So again, it's that, what we're seeing is continual evolution within technology. And whilst a lot of this is in the consumer space, that consumer element and the fact that it's impacting culture is giving us these unreal expectations of what we expect when we come to work. We all walk around with, high-powered devices, iPhones, or Huawei's, Pixels, whatever it may be. You've got potentially a MacBook, a Pixelbook, whatever it may be at home, your devices of choice, iPads. You come to the office and you're given this piece of equipment that can't take that anywhere because charge will only last a few minutes, and it's a heavy old device. But all of this is impacting what's happening in the workplace. And I'm not talking about just devices, right? I'm just talking about the technology that we use. You're used to using collaboration tools at home in your personal life. How many use G Suite outside of work? Right, how many use it in work? No, nice. But things like Slack, there are tools that you're familiar with that when you go into an organization, you download it or you set up an account. And for those organizations that aren't on a corporate instance of G Suite, you've got no visibility over what your people are doing and what they're sharing and what is leaving your corporate environment. And I'm not just talking about G Suite, I'm talking about any of these tools that enable you to collaborate more effectively with your colleagues. So it's a massive security issue. And by the way, Graham, who's in the back, give us a wave, Graham. Graham is going to be talking about security a bit later on. By all means, go and pick his brains about this, but happy to have a conversation about how you can start to get around it, because there are pockets of this, shadow IT, stealth IT, whatever you want to call it, in every business. So we can have a conversation about that. But all of this stuff that's impacting culture is then changing the landscape internally within organizations. And what we're seeing is, and certainly this is a Gartner report that I will reference Gartner a lot, by the way. I used to work there. So I'm not biased. There's a couple of other reports in here, but I like a study. By 2021, more than half of global enterprises are predicted to have an all-in cloud strategy. I think that's bold. That's really bold. But we're seeing more of a direction of the organizations we work with and talk to of building out their cloud strategies or delivering their cloud strategies. Couple that with the employee workforce. Hate this term, but technically I am one, the workforce is changing. So all of this stuff, these external factors, it is impacting how we do business internally. 77% of millennials think that flexible work hours make them more productive. I mean, I agree with that massively, even if I wasn't. I would almost say cut the millennial out and say this is probably people in general. That flexibility that organizations give you, that empowerment to say, you know what, this is your job. It doesn't matter where you are, and that comes on to my next point, but it doesn't matter where you are or what hours you work, so long as you get that job done, you're going to be more productive. So it means that you could go to the gym, jump on your Peloton if you want. You could go shopping, whatever it may be. The other part of this is that remote working. So 40% of said the same of remote and virtual work. I'm a nightmare for it, as much as my wife detests it. But my view is I could be anywhere in the world, so long as I can access the tools that I need, which are predominantly SaaS-based, I can do my job. Most of you guys, hands up, remote work, virtual work? Yeah? You all agree with that? More productive, yeah? Okay. Ultimately, all of this stuff, to get to the point, right, is transforming the way that we work. Fundamentally, it's transforming the way that we work. And it needs to, because if we want to have the next billion-dollar idea, we want to be the next Uber, whatever it may be, or we want to drive change within our own businesses, we need to be more productive and get out of the time that we spend on inane and less productive tasks, low-value tasks. And what this is going to do, when we transform the way we work, we're becoming more engaged. We're using technology we're more familiar with. We're becoming more data-driven. And actually what we can then do with that data is mind-blowing. We're becoming more productive, collaborative, agile, and more responsive, but then more secure at the same time. So that brings me on to building that collaborative culture. Still bear in mind those three things, right? Simple, smart, and secure, many of which Daniel, when he talks about the suite itself, it's going to really start to ring true. But teamwork, right, so Dale Carnegie, big fan. If you get the chance to read his books, phenomenal. But teamwork is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon goals, so uncommon results. It's what we're all working towards, right? If we know what we're pulling towards, the why we're doing something, we can all pull in that same direction and get there much more effectively. And without strong tools, your workforce is likely to waste time. So why is that important? Let's just use another study. So this is a Forrester study. Trevor's talked about it already this morning. So I've talked a lot about dispersion of organizations, but there are often silos that are created within businesses, right? That siloed work overall slows people down. People spend 20% of their work week searching for and consolidating information. If we couple that with the fact that we live in email, and email is eating up our ability to perform. Look, these are bold estimates, but you may agree with them, you may not. An additional 27.5% of the work week is spent reading and responding to email. So if we then make that a little bit more real, after the fact that 47.5% of our time is spent on two tasks that provide little or no intellectual property or value to our businesses, we then look at some maths around that. bear with me on this first one because it's American. Average Fortune 500 employee makes $35,000 per year. There are 28.2 million people that work at the Fortune 500 companies. I mean, is anyone a super genius that can tell me how much that's costing them? I mean, I'll give you my MacBook if you can tell me that. Companies are paying $468 billion potentially, right, for people to consolidate information and check email. So let's apply it to an example in the UK. Average salary in the UK, 26.5 grand per year, give or take. Let's say for this creatively named ABC Limited, there are 1,500 people. They could be paying £19.65 million per year for people to consolidate information and check email. It's a lot, right? And even if you're conservative and don't buy in and believe this, when you start to have those conversations internally and think about how much time you potentially spend searching through email, searching for that one document that you know it's on our intranet somewhere and you need it for that presentation that you've got next week, but I have no idea where it is. Or I've buried it in a file structure that is so complex that, I mean, I can tell you now, I'm not a filer, I'm a searcher. And that's the beauty, and I'll let Danny talk about search a bit later on, but we've all wasted huge amounts of time with these two activities. So how do we fix it? This is one part of it, is equipping your tools that are actually going to enable that productivity. So technology is one part of that. And having tools that we're familiar with and that make life easy, simple, smart, to position us to focus on the end state, right? What are we trying to do as a business? Are we trying to find the next big idea? Are we trying to wow our customers in new ways? Are we trying to improve customer experience? Whatever that is, you want to get a platform or a set of tools that are going to allow you to do that. So that's one part of it, right? And you've probably all seen this pie or flow chart, flow diagram, whatever you want to call it. It's about more than just technology. So we're going to talk a little bit about how, and then you're going to hear from a couple of customers that really that's where the value is listening to what those guys have done. Another Gartner study, I'm sorry. Culture and people are the biggest barriers to successful digital transformation. And there's huge amounts of research on this, so there's other companies available. But why is it hard? So the neuroscience-y bit, right? There was a study that was done between two neuroscientists. One was studying physical pain, the other was studying social pain. And they happened to be sat next to each other. But what they realized is that when we as an individual have this fear of being excluded from something, it triggers the same part of the brain that physical pain does. The one thing that we then move on to is this single state. So uncertainty. I thought you probably thought you'd get away without hearing about Brexit for a little while. We're all in a state of complete uncertainty at the moment with regards to Brexit. But there was a study that was done by a bank in 2008, so financial crisis. And what that looked at was they knew redundancies were coming, and they knew that they were going to be made. Two departments were given, we'll call it different information. One department was told you're all going to be laid off, every single one of you. The other department wasn't. They were told nothing. They were left in a state of uncertainty. And the interesting thing was, the team that knew they were leaving, they knew they had to go and find new jobs, but their work improved, or certainly stayed the same, right? It didn't diminish because they weren't thinking about all of this uncertainty. Is it going to affect me? Is it not? By the way, some of these studies, I'm not making them up. I'll just share them with you as a result. The next piece is around habitual tasks. We are creatures of habit. Our brains are lazy. As humans, it's difficult to break habits. You know, if you're used to coming home, spending time with your family, or not getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning so you can go to the gym, it's very difficult to break those habits. And the same in the workplace, right? It's very difficult to break these habits. So change is hard. It is hard. And when people hear change, they immediately think loss. If we go back to that idea that change can give rise to opportunities, that's an example of that. You know, all of a sudden, you're wearing a tie on your head and you've got things hanging off you and you're doing all sorts of crazy stuff to change your physical appearance. But we need to try and change that, get out of our mindset that it's all about loss. So when we're feeling overwhelmed by unfamiliar concepts, we immediately invoke that fight or flight. That's the natural human reaction. And when we can't process things, we can't innovate. So that's why it's hard. Ultimately, you know, you guys, yes, some of you have begun to write or deploy or deliver on your cloud strategy. There will come a point when you do, if you haven't. Supporting your people through that move is massively important. And what that delivers, it can show great benefits. So projects with excellent change management programs 6 times more likely to meet or exceed objectives. And we've worked with customers where there are a number of things that, you know, the customer really buys into this, right? And they have excellent change management programs. Conversely, we've worked with customers where they don't, and they don't get that senior leader buy-in. And the difference in momentum and success is phenomenal. And then companies with high effectiveness in change management are 3.5 times more likely to financially outperform their peers. Again, two separate. So it does just highlight why this is important. And ultimately, there's a personal transition that with anything like this, we need to go through. And this is, you know, you guys as business leaders or heads of, wherever your position in the organizations may be, it's helping your people on this transition to accept change. Even if you apply this to your personal life, we've all been here, right? Something happens, we deny it. We then begin to resist it. Eventually, we come to accept it. And then we start to explore what that then means for us. You're then starting to understand it a little bit more, understand why we're doing it, so you become committed, and through that, you have growth. We see this in our personal lives, you see it in your business life. And as I said, I'm not going to labor the point around it being a fear of loss, but if you put yourselves in the mindset of in the shoes of your colleagues and your peers, a lot of these things, if we said to someone, right, we're going to take away Microsoft Office, bye-bye Excel, it's going, we're taking it away. You've got people there that have this natural affinity towards Excel that have been doing it all their lives. Right? It's hard. It's hard because they're a power user and you're taking away something that belongs to them. Little does it matter that you can do most of this stuff in the equivalent tool at Google, but that almost, you're taking away that loss of control, that loss of competence, because now they're not that power user. So a big thing here is around communication, continually involving your people in these change initiatives. I show this because this serves as this is a conversation for another day, but this is a methodology that you've probably seen variations of this. This is a methodology that Google developed that we use, and ultimately that's looking at some of the practical things that you can do as a business throughout the stages of a change program. In exciting your people. Are we doing, I touched on it just before, are we engaging stakeholders? Because if we're not going to get buy-in and we're not going to build momentum and we're not going to see that through and make sure that it's successful. Enabling, ultimately executing, and we're deploying training resources, we're helping our people to support that change initiative, and then we're building from there, right? We're expanding and we're embedding that within the business. This, we run as a completely separate session. It's a transformation workshop, and this is almost a taster to it. There's going to be a series of these sessions over the course of the year, but we do these specifically with organizations where you almost do prototyping and look at ideas that can potentially go into production. Think of it as like a hackathon for a business. So I'm going to shut up in a minute and hand over to some of the customers. But some top tips. I'll share these slides with you, but ultimately, the one thing that I would really draw on is this part here, is why are we doing it? You saw that with the bank, right? They understand why, you get buy-in. People understand it, they can get on board with it. If they don't, it's up to them. But ultimately, communicating the why and what's in it for them. Everyone cares about that, right? You know, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of today? What am I going to get out of being here? And the enablement piece that I've just touched on, helping the people, give them the skills, right? Give them the skills to be successful and then reward them for that. So I think that brings me to the end, but there's some practical things. I'm more than happy to have conversations with you guys. There's some practical things that you can do. I appreciate I've not touched on any of the technology, really, because that's not what the point of that session was about. We need to build an environment, you know, that's almost that workplace culture, that collaboration, culture of collaboration is a starting point. That's your platform to then go out and grow and drive change within your business.